Mr. Secretary, I think it's important, I'd like to start by addressing one of the big elephants in the room. And that President Trump told the Washington Post last month that he opposes the current and former White House aides and personnel testifying to Congress. He said, quote, "There is no reason to go any further, and especially in a Congress where it's very partisan. The lack of transparency and accountability concerns this committee a great deal. Since the beginning of the year, we've sent 17 documented requests to Interior Department and only got substantive partial responses to 2 of them. I want to be clear that answering congressional inquiries is not a matter of the president's or, for that matter, a secretary's personal discretion. We have legal justification for that kind of request and no legal justification for not responding to those requests. It's also, I think, important to note that the administration's lack of accountability has gone well beyond the Mueller report. The White House has gone so far as to ignore legally unambiguous access to the president's tax returns. President Trump has made it clear he's not interested in cooperating with legitimate congressional inquiries of any kind, for that matter. His attitude seems to be, Mr. Secretary, that Democrats are just out to get him, and so his administration is not going to respond to our questions or our concerns. I'm concerned that this stonewalling will escalate to a constitutional collision. From crisis to collision seems to be an inevitability if the attitude continues. If the president continues to ignore legitimate questions, whenever it suits him, and tells his appointees to do the same, Congress will have the duty to defend and enforce their constitutional rights. Since Secretary Zinke's abrupt departure, your transition from acting secretary to confirmed head of the department, we've been doing our due diligence on this committee to fulfill our oversight responsibility, and in doing so, have made inquiries from subcommittees to full committee. We've been I might add, we've been very judicious about compelling the agency to respond to these questions. But we need to know, I think the committee needs to know, and I pose this question, we need to know what kind of relationship we're going to have with you as an equal branch of government from now on. I'd like to hear from you whether you feel the same way the president does in terms of his attitude toward committee oversight, inquiry, legitimate questions, and legal initiatives to try to acquire and have that information. And can we expect a healthier relationship with the Interior Department? That's the question, because I really believe that, as I said earlier, as we trying to deal with the rationale and the motivation behind a given Interior Department decision, a policy change, a regulatory move, essential to us being able to perform our job and be responsive to the American people is information. Information that will deal with those 2 questions about rationale and motivation. And so with that, the question is a general question, Mr. Secretary, but I think it is one that's, that this cloud, the cloud that's being created right now by the Trump administration in terms of non-responsiveness to the majority in this House, I think is escalating. And my question is, what is the relationship between this committee, its majority, and your office and the Department of Interior?
So I respect the role of Congress to conduct oversight, and I believe that the department needs to be responsive. And at the same time, that interest is tempered by an interest that I have to also ensure that I am appropriately protective of the legitimate interests of the department and the executive branch.